whenever you want to start it.
Good morning. My name is Senator Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, and I'm representing Senate District 28 in Los Angeles County. I'm here today on behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus, and I thank everyone for joining us today. The state of California, under the leadership of our former state senator, Holly Mitchell, introduced the first diversity and equity and inclusion initiative in the California film tax credit policy in 2018. And that initiative was introduced following the Oscar So White controversy on the heels of the Me Too movement in 2016. And when we started our legislative cycle last year, we were determined to ensure that California's film industry stayed in California by investing in expanding the California tax credits to include a refundable portion and to expand the investment of California taxpayers' dollars to $1.6 billion. But a week after we signed this pivotal legislation, news of the erasure of diversity and equity and inclusion executives began to surface. One executive removal is a fluke, but more than 4 now in the last 2 weeks is a pattern. It is a troubling pattern. It is a pattern that suggests that diversity, equity, and inclusion is no longer a priority at the highest levels of California's film industry, where decisions are made and institutional change happens. It's a pattern that conveys that the early progress that we have made together with that industry to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion above and below the lines is now coming to a grinding halt. It is problematic. During the negotiations for the film tax credits, I strongly urged the industry to adopt certified workforce retention measurement systems so that we could together track our progress toward diversity. But there was resistance, mainly because the industry discussed how their DEI leadership had helped to ensure that numbers were increasing amongst underrepresented populations. Many of these DEI executives, Black women. These were the leaders who helped the industry make the case for the $1.6 billion. But by the time the ink was dry from the governor's signature, many of those women in the C-suites were gone. That was not the post-film credit I was expecting to see. And it certainly is not a result that the California Black Legislative Caucus and our allies can accept. We want real answers. And so we are here today calling on industry executives to meet with the state legislative Black Caucus and leaders in the coming weeks to explain what is behind this erasure, to provide the evidence of how diversity, equity, and inclusion and the progress made will continue to move forward given the lack of leadership and gravitas at the forefront of those proposals, and how they plan to adopt a system for tracking retention of the workforce that we are collectively building together for an industry that will be rooted in California and that will include all of our communities. We want progress toward real inclusion and equity in this industry. And we want to make sure that our tax dollars are not in any way involved in this erasure. We hope that these conversations will lead to a commitment and a level of trust that will allow us to continue to move forward in expanding our investment in this important industry. But we cannot do that if we are not certain that we are moving forward with the same goals in mind, and that is a film industry in which underrepresented populations have voice and leadership in building this industry for the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Assembly Member Tina McKenna.
Good morning. My name is Assemblymember Tina McKenna, and I proudly represent Assembly District 61, South Bay cities and communities of Los Angeles County. California doesn't have to choose between retaining and growing jobs in the film and television industry and increasing the diversity of its workforce. It can do both. I'm a Hollywood kid. I grew up on film and television sets that both of my parents worked on. I graduated from Hollywood High, go Sheets. I even got a chance to dance on Soul Train. But seriously, I know firsthand the importance of the film and television industry to Los Angeles and our state's economy, which is why, after having worked this year on developing a new film tax credit that will keep Californians working in this Golden State industry, I was highly offended to see the industry respond to a $1.6 billion tax subsidy by quietly eliminating Black women from executive positions with a number of studios. Many of these women were involved in their studio's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which raises serious questions about their true commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the film industry. The film industry must do better and take demonstrable steps to ensure that these studios, which will benefit from the tax credit, also prioritize the hiring of individuals behind the camera that look like California. When the California Film Tax Credit 4.0 proposal builds upon previous work to solidify California as the entertainment capital of the world, it does not include requirements to increase the diversity of its below-line hiring. The California Film Tax Credit 4.0 only requires a good faith effort. California, that's not good enough. We should all expect more from any industry that is receiving $1.6 billion in subsidies from California taxpayers. And in the coming months, the Legislative Black Caucus will be meeting with Governor Newsom, film industry executives, our labor partners, and the public to require greater transparency and real results to ensure that Black, Brown, API, and other minorities are part of California's film industry's future. It is reasonable and appropriate to require clear and measurable metrics to ensure that all Californians are able to participate in Hollywood's creative economy and include pathways for a new generation of diverse workers to build a career in television and streaming of film. California film and television industry, they should embrace this. At a moment when California can double down on its long-term commitment to the creative arts industry, we expect the industry to double down on its own commitment to real diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Studios should embrace working with their union partners to increase paid internships and paid apprenticeships that will lead to middle-class careers. Studios should take demonstrable actions necessary to show taxpayers that they are as committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workforce as they are about the profits of their next big blockbuster or their next award-winning series. It is a false choice for anyone to say that California has to choose between retaining and growing jobs in the film and television industry and increasing the diversity of its workforce. California, the film industry can and must do both. Next, we'll hear from Senator Mint.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. My name is Dave Min, and I have the privilege of representing the 37th Senate District in the heart of Orange County. including my home city of Irvine. So we're not Hollywood, and I didn't have the joys of being on Soul Train, so FOMO here. But I stand here as Vice Chair of the API, Asian American and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. And we are proud, along with my colleagues, Assemblymember Phil Ting and Assemblymember Alex Lee, we're proud to stand here in solidarity with the Black Caucus. Look, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but it certainly looks suspicious when, in a short time frame after the $1.6 billion tax credit was signed into law, that we see a number of leading African American female Hollywood executives being let go. And I think it's important to get answers as to how that happened. And what I want to emphasize here is just how important I believe, and I think our colleagues in the API Legislative Caucus believe, that diversity, equity, and inclusion are. Now, I know that there are extremists out there trying to make DEI into a boogeyman, but we know from countless research that DEI makes our classrooms, our boardrooms better. You see improved returns on investment when you have more diversity in the workplace. This is important, and it's important for the reasons of representation. As an Asian American, as a Korean American, I can tell you how exciting it was to see API start to get represented in leading Hollywood movies. When Everything Everywhere All at Once won the Best Picture Oscar last year, I can tell you that countless kids, millions of kids around this country, just took heart because they could see people that looked like them, that shared their life experiences, winning major Hollywood awards. We need to see that trend continue. For too long, marginalized communities have not been represented in our TV screens, in our movie theaters, and that needs to change. I think Hollywood has a really important role to play here, and I just want to say, as Vice Chair of the API Legislative Caucus, we take that commitment that Hollywood leaders made to us to ensure that DEI would be a priority for them. We take that very seriously. So we stand here in solidarity. We look forward to hearing answers. Thank you very much for putting this together.
Next, we'll hear from Assemblymember Phil Ting.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Let me just thank Senator Smallwood Cuevas and Assemblymember McKinnon for helping organize this press conference along with the Legislative Black Caucus. I'm here to stand in solidarity. I think Senator Min talked a little bit about why this is so important, why it's such an important issue. What we've seen throughout the history of Hollywood is a history of exclusion. And when there hasn't been exclusion, what we've seen is stereotyping and negative caricatures throughout the history of televisions, movies, and in fact, it's only been very recently that our communities have started showing up on the big screen or started showing up in TV shows. And that was from a point of intentionality. Diversity happens only when people have intentions for diversity. And what we saw is the leaders in different studios whose intentions were to create a broader cross-section to make the industry more representative of Los Angeles, more representative of California, more representative of the way America looks, and the more representative of the communities which historically have been missing in action. So part of our major discussion throughout the debate of our film tax credit amongst the various legislators, not just the legislators here, but through a variety of legislators in the debate, was around the diversity, equity, inclusion programs and why those programs were so critical. Because while there are many jobs and the prestigious jobs are in front of the camera, there are thousands and thousands of jobs behind the camera. And what we want to make sure is the representation is not just there, what we see on the screen, but what we see behind the screen. And for too long, we had communities that lived next to the studios, but could never get in. For too long, we had folks that worked around the studios, maybe even serviced the studio workers, but could not actually be part of the industry. Because if you grew up in LA, you know there's only one industry in LA, and that's the Hollywood industry. And so today, we are standing to ask questions, to demand answers, and to make sure that the industry who made promises around diversity, equity, inclusion to all of us as we were voting and debating the extension of the film tax credit, that those promises get kept and that our communities are made whole, because we can accept nothing less than to make sure that our communities are represented, that our communities are depicted, and that our communities get to participate in one of the most important industries, not just in the state, but really all over the world. This is in light of the recent Supreme Court affirmative action case. And what you heard from the proponents of the affirmative action case, because they weren't there to help Asian Americans. Let's just be clear. They used Asian Americans to fight affirmative action. They said their next goal is to go to ensure that they're fighting diversity in the workplace. So let's just think about that. So at a time when diversity in the workplace is under threat, Hollywood decides to pull back. And so for us, we as leaders of our states, leaders of the state legislature say that we are not going back. We are moving forward. Our state is moving forward, our communities are moving forward, and we are absolutely going to ensure that Hollywood moves forward. So again, let me just thank the Legislative Black Caucus for organizing this event, and just an honor to stand in solidarity with you all. And next, we are going to have Assembly Member Luz Rivas, who also chairs our LA delegation, but has a number of responsibilities in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. I want to thank the California Legislative Black Caucus for raising this important issue regarding the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the entertainment industry. The recent departure of key Black women leaders at top Hollywood entertainment companies demonstrates our need to diversify those in senior leadership positions in these companies. The entertainment industry is a massive employer for the LA region, and the LA area is one of the most diverse in the state. That's why I supported the film tax credit this year, because it brings jobs to our communities. But we must do better. We have to ensure that there is representation in Hollywood, and that those who do enter this workforce are given the support needed to be successful. As chair of the LA County delegation, I convened multiple meetings with the film industry in the issue on equity, and this remains an important issue for the delegation. We had a very productive conversation here at the Capitol where I invited Hollywood studio executives to join our LA County members for a few hours of discussion, and they personally got to see and hear from members why diversity is important to us. And so that's why I was very disappointed to read about these key departures in Hollywood studios. Also, I want to express the support from the California Legislative Latino Caucus. Our vice chair was here and had to leave for something else. But those of us that are members of the Latino Caucus stand in solidarity with the Legislative Black Caucus to demand answers. Why is this happening right after we took a vote to support Hollywood? As an LA member of the Assembly and chair of the Los Angeles County delegation, I'm proud to stand here in support, and we will continue to demand answers and stand with our colleagues from the Black Caucus. Thank you. Okay, next we have Senator Skinner.
I want to thank the Black Caucus for pulling this together. I am Nancy Skinner, State Senator from the Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond area. I also happen to be chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus. At the point where the California budget that we passed just was signed into law, whatever, a couple days ago, where we expanded and extended a film tax credit to support the industry in our state, that industry would turn around and eliminate its executives who are charged with the responsibility to ensure that that industry is diverse, is outrageous. And the Women's Caucus joins happily in expressing that outrage. And as we know, diversity and inclusion includes many, many, many categories of people. Because, and those of us who, you don't even have to be necessarily following the news, you can just follow popular culture. And you have seen repeatedly at the industry's signature event, which is the Academy Awards, you've seen repeatedly women in that industry, blacks in that industry, other people of color in that industry, more recently, AAPI folks in that industry, all come forward and use that as a platform to decry the lack of diversity in every aspect of that industry. It is inappropriate at this point, with that lack of diversity, and with the extension of the state of California's support for those studios to fire, again, those executives responsible for ensuring that they be inclusive and diverse. So I'm happily here to support the Black Caucus.
Dr. King said this: a man dies when he refused to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refused to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refused to take a stand for that which is true. Today we are joined by the Caucus, who have already spoken, who already have expressed their strong concern for what the film tax credit has done. It is not a coincidence in our minds that after we've been lobbied, after we voted, $1.6 billion, billion with a B, was given to this industry. And then to turn around and have not one person leave that's African American descent, who happens to be a female, but 5 others to follow. Now, many of them, a few of them have already indicated they took jobs in other places, but others did not. Others signed up for the task that was at hand, and the work still needs to be done. And in this spirit, in the era that we're in right now, fighting for inclusion, fighting for affirmative action, what the Supreme Court has just done to affirmative action in this country, and then to come on the heels of what these studios have done. It is a slap in the face of not only women, it's a slap in the face for people of color in California, and I would say in the United States of America. And today there are some demands that has been advocated and communicated. 1, a conversation with the governor. 2, a conversation with the executives of these studios to sit down with members of the Caucus as well as the Legislative Black Caucus, and for them to answer the question, why is this coincidence taking place right now? And we're also asking for leaders in the legislature to do everything they can that's legal and that's permissible to hold up the resources, the $1.6 billion, until we get the answers that we're seeking. So I want to thank the Caucus, all the members that stand here represented to express their concerns in this area. I want to also thank the leadership of the Legislative Black Caucus, as well as Assemblywoman Tina McKenna and also Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas for standing out in a very bold way, who led the charge in this particular space. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Is there any questions?
So, I think Assemblymember Gibson just said it. The bill was signed into law to give them the tax credit, but the money hasn't left the building. So, is there any plans to be able to say, is there legislation, a special session? I know that you're talking about meetings. Is there a hearing that could happen in the fall or sometime before you guys leave, I guess, for not for this break, summer break coming up, but when you get back in a special session or what have you, to be able to try to get those questions as public as possible?
Yeah, I want to say there's all of the above is absolutely within our reach and within our power, but we don't need to have a hearing. What we're saying to the industry, we need you to come to the table now. We need the answers now. We need to understand and see evidence of a plan that says diversity, equity, and inclusion is still a priority, and that you are able to reach those goals without having experienced high-level leadership to do it. We know that's an impossibility, but we want them to make sure that they can provide a plan and show us what is the way that they're going to accomplish this. Does that mean that some of these women will be brought back? We hope so. Does this mean that they will have to find adequate replacement to show us that there is going to be, because we know people do change, right? Leaders do change, but it's on the industry to ensure that they are replaced with folks that have the same skill set, expertise, and experience to make sure that the will of California investors are met. And that is that this is a workforce that represents California above and below the line. So, you know, long answer to your question, but we are calling for this meeting immediately to happen, and we expect a response from them. We are reaching out to the administration to get their support, to urge these executives to the table and to sit with us to hear this explanation and what the plan is moving forward.
And then also, we would like to propose a legislative amendment to add this tracking to the film tax credit, because a good faith effort California is just not good enough.
No, thank you for that. And so some of the women, I know that Senator Skinner said it, but some of the women were fired and some were just kind of said it was more hostile. They weren't, I want to make sure that I understand that. So were people forced out fired, or were the women, did they leave because they were basically twiddling their thumbs in their
Well, that's why we
role?
want to meet with the executives, because
I think anybody who's been in a hostile work environment, it's very few people want a termination, say, on their record. And so there's ways where behind the closed door, whatever. So of course, many of those individuals may not be able to publicly say, I was fired. They were driven out.
well,
Mic drop.
mic drop. Yes.
Yes, UCLA put out an annual report in 2021 that there were some improvements in some areas, as far as 40% of the film leads being women, and overall 42% of the actors. Women underrepresented groups are still heavily underserved in the directives. I know we're talking about the executive things, but it seems like 2 steps forward, 1 step, 2, 3 steps backwards up. Is there any way that the California Legislative Black Caucus and their colleagues can put together maybe a task force to see why these numbers jump up and down, and try to get these people in a room in a public setting, these executives, non-white executives, it seems like that, because it seems like we're going backward. And the reason why I mention that, and I hope you can answer the question, because several years ago we was having this problem at the Oscars, okay, when this arose that there was many categories that people of color, specifically blacks, were in these specific spots. Now there seems there was some improvements, and once again we're stepping back. Why? Maybe a task force could be put together to try to answer some of these questions. That's my question.
Well, I want to say that is exactly one of the things we were asking for in our negotiations, because we know our job is to make sure that we're protecting the taxpayers' investment and to have the policies, but we have to have folks who are watching and tracking and monitoring and interrogating these numbers in real time, so that we continue to see the retention and the advancement of underrepresented populations, both, as you said, on the screen, right, but also the folks behind the camera doing the work. That was not part of this deal that came out, and I think this is part of the conversation that we have to have in terms of moving forward. We don't want to read about it in Variety and in the LA Times. We are co-investors in this effort, $1.6 billion. The state of California and the industry working together. We need to have oversight and a task force that is charged with looking at this in real time and making sure our progress is made. So those are some of the things we want to have the conversation about. And if we can't get to where we need to get to, we know we have legislative power, and we know these tax credits will come back to us. Assemblymember Tina McKenna and I will hopefully with the taxpayer support, the voter support, we will be here for a long time. And we look forward to seeing this industry come back to us and figuring out ways to ensure that we do keep these jobs here, but we also ensure that all of California has access and are retained in a fair way in this industry.
And Senator, thank you, Senator, Assemblywoman McKenna, you did just mention an amendment that you'd like to add. Could you explain a little bit more of that in
Well, we
detail?
would like to, we were really fighting for tracking. We think, tracking is reasonable, because as we give these tax credits, we give tax credits to many industries, and we have many requirements to get the taxpayers' money. And so we think we will be responsible legislators to give out $1.6 billion. We need to track what's happening. We need to track who is working in these jobs. And that way, when they come back to ask for a tax credit again, we could decide, we have the data to decide, do we really want to grant these tax credits to the film industry? And is every Californian benefiting from these jobs? And so we would like to do an amendment, a bill next year. I think the senator and I will do a bill next year about the tracking, to put tracking on the film tax credit.
I mean, you guys have talked a lot about transparency and real results. What do real results look like to you? Would you like to see like a certain percentage of Black women executives in Hollywood? Is that something for the industry to decide? And I guess that would depend on who you talk to, but what does real results look like to you?
Real results would look like California. Real results would look like not just Black women working, but Black people working, API people working, Latino people working, Indian people working, everybody working. Like, it should look like California. That's what it looks like. We took a tour of the motion picture industry, and it was just upsetting because we didn't see any people of color on that studio. And so we never want to visit a studio like that again and not see people that look like California.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.